Welcome to the new video. In this recap, in an old mine in Oregon, Frank is finishing up work when Aiden, his young son, calls him back home. He tells the boy he's going to finish one last job and asks him to wait in the car. Shortly after, Frank enters the mine and puts on a protective mask when suddenly he hears a strange noise. He ignores it and continues through a secret tunnel, where he and his partner Kenny have set up a laboratory to produce certain prohibited substances. As they are about to leave, Frank hears a noise again, which this time seems to be from some wild animal. The two rush to get out of the tunnel, but in the darkness, a strange creature jumps toward them and begins to attack. Minutes later, Aiden realizes that his father is taking too long and goes to the warehouse, but there is no sign of him anywhere. Even so, he enters the place and calls for his father, but the boy ends up disappearing into the darkness. 3 weeks later, at a local school, teacher Julia Meadows gives a lesson on the different ways of telling a story. However, none of the students are interested in the subject, especially Lucas, Aiden's older brother. After class, the boy goes to get his things when he sees 3 troublemakers, led by Clint, making fun of him. However, from inside his backpack, Lucas takes out a monkey doll that belongs to the group's leader and decides to take it secretly to get revenge on the boy. On the way, Lucas sees a small opossum near the coast, and for no apparent reason, he picks up a rock and eliminates the poor animal. After that, he returns home with the opossum, and with his father and brother away, the boy goes to the first floor, which is locked with several locks. Later, teacher Julia returns home, where she finds Paul, her brother, and the town sheriff. Apparently, the two had a traumatic childhood, and after spending some time away from town, she returned, and Paul welcomed her into their parents' old house. The sheriff asks if his sister is adjusting to the new school, and Julia says she is doing her best, but the students do not participate in class. Even so, she does not intend to give up on the class and comments on Lucas, a quiet boy who usually draws in class. When night falls, the boy is drawing in his room and picks up the doll he stole from Clint. Furious, he uses a knife to remove the doll's head, but soon after, someone knocks on the door. Lucas panics and remains motionless in his room, shining his flashlight at the door, waiting for the knocking to stop. The next morning, the boy goes to another class, and Julia asks the students to show their homework. The assignment was to write a story and tell it to everyone in class, and this time, Julia asks Lucas to participate. The boy then stands up and narrates the story of a family of 3 bears, where the father fed and cared for his cubs. However, one day, the father and the youngest cub got sick, and when they returned home, they were more aggressive and hungry than ever. Despite this, the 3 bears remain united, with the older cub being responsible for taking care of the family. The teacher is intrigued by the story, and when she notices the boy's dirty and torn clothes, she decides to find out more about Lucas. After class, the troublemakers go to look inside the boy's backpack, where they find the headless monkey doll. Clint gets furious and attacks the boy, who, luckily, is saved by one of the school employees. After that, he is taken to the infirmary, where his injuries are treated and he is released to return home. However, this only makes Julia more concerned about the boy, and the next day, she takes advantage of her day off and invites him out for ice cream. Once there, Julia tries to get closer to Lucas and asks him about his family, with the boy revealing that his mother passed away recently. Julia feels sorry for him and says that she also lost her mother when she was a child. The conversation continues and the teacher asks if there is anyone else to take care of him, and the boy talks about his father Frank and his younger brother Aiden. Julia asks why she has never seen the boy's brother at school, but Lucas does not want to talk about it and leaves, asking her not to follow him. After that, the boy goes home, where he sees several crows feeding on the body of an animal. The boy scares the birds away and, using a plastic bag, picks up the remains and puts them in his backpack, as if he were taking them to feed some animal. Without him knowing, teacher Julia secretly goes to his house to talk to the boy's father. However, when she arrives at the location, the door is open, and she hears knocking sounds at the door and leaves frightened. What she doesn't suspect is that inside the house is Frank, trapped in a room and acting as if under the influence of an evil force. Later, Lucas returns home, and after placing the remains in a container, he takes it to the attic. There, Frank appears, acting like a rabid animal, and devours everything in a few seconds. Despite his condition, he still retains a little humanity and asks his son to stay away from him. Soon after, Aiden appears, and even though he is in a similar situation to his father, he manages to maintain control, and Lucas gives him some food. It is then revealed that the boy hunts animals to feed his father and brother, being forced to keep them locked in the attic. After the meal, he gives his brother some candy, but this causes the boy to have a strange reaction, crying dark tears and with a viscous liquid coming out of his mouth. Far away, Julia returns home and places a drawing by Lucas on the table, which she found torn up in the school trash. She puts the pieces of the drawing together and is confronted with the image of the boy being devoured by a monster. While trying to understand the meaning of the drawing, she is startled when Paul suddenly appears and asks what she is doing. After telling him everything, the sheriff comments that the boy's father is a known criminal in town, but he has never been able to arrest him. In addition, he feared that Frank's children would have no one to raise them, and for that reason, he always turned a blind eye to his crimes. Even so, Julia decides to investigate the boy's situation further, and the next morning, she goes to take a look at the boy's desk in the classroom. There, she finds several bizarre drawings similar to the ones she found, and decides to show everything to Ellen, the school principal. The teacher believes that these drawings are a cry for help from the boy, who may be suffering from something very serious at home. The principal then promises that, when she has some free time, she will go to the boy's house to talk to his father. Meanwhile, Lucas is in the forest setting a trap to hunt more animals. Suddenly, the boy hears someone approaching and hides among the trees when a hunter named Warren appears with his rifle. Looking around, he finds no one nearby, but the hunter comes across half a human body lying on the ground. The man then rushes to tell Paul about it, just as Julia goes to meet her brother and hears everything. In addition to this body part lying in the forest, Paul is informed that another half was found inside the mine, indicating that it is Kenny, Frank's partner. The police officer then mobilizes the team to take everything to the coroner and identify what may have happened to the victim. With both halves together, the doctor and coroner begins the analysis, but he warns Paul that it will be virtually impossible to discover the cause. The doctor noticed strange bite marks, which do not appear to be from a wild animal, but rather made by a human being. While the doctor continues to analyze the body, Principal Ellen goes to Lucas's house, looking for Frank. As with Julia, she finds the door open, and upon entering, Ellen smells a terrible odor inside the house. Even so, the principal continues to explore the place and comes across the attic door, which is covered with locks. As soon as she manages to enter, the smell becomes even stronger, and the principal finds Aiden, covered in dirt and crouching on the floor. Frightened by the child's condition, Ellen tries to take Aiden away, but Frank appears behind her and knocks her down with a blow. The woman tries to escape, but the man grabs her hand and starts biting her neck until she is lifeless. After doing this, Frank emits a strange luminous energy from his chest, and his whole body begins to contort. Finally, the man begins to scream, and from inside his throat, something resembling moose antlers emerges, completely destroying his mouth. At that very moment, Paul and his team of police officers go to the mine and search Frank and Kenny's secret laboratory. There, they find pieces of antlers on the floor, but have no idea what animal they belong to. The investigation continues, but Paul receives a call from the police station informing him that the school principal is missing. At the same time, Lucas leaves school when he runs into Clint, who followed him home to teach him a lesson. However, from the treetops, the boys hear the sound of a huge creature jumping towards Clint and beginning to devour him. Lucas quickly runs away when he sees Principal Ellen's car parked near his house. Fearing the worst, the boy goes to the attic and finds the principal's body, already lifeless on the floor. Lucas is then forced to clean everything up so that no one finds out, as well as putting a blanket over the principal's car to hide it. When night falls, Sheriff Paul returns home and talks to Julia about Ellen's disappearance. He asks if his sister has any idea where she might be, and the teacher recalls that Ellen was going to talk to Frank about his son. The sheriff then goes to the location and calls out to the man, but Lucas remains hidden inside the house, making no noise. Since he doesn't have a warrant to enter, Paul decides to go home, promising to return the next day. However, more bad news arrives when Clint's mother goes to the school, saying that her son has also disappeared. The sheriff is informed of the situation and promises to find the boy, but avoids talking about the other disappearances in the area so as not to alarm her. However, Julia is certain that Clint's disappearance is somehow related to what is happening at Lucas's house, and decides to get to the bottom of it. She goes to the boy's house and, upon arriving at the entrance, finds the principal's car hidden under a blanket. Julia quickly alerts her brother, and when the sheriff enters the house, he finds Principal Ellen's body completely devoured. Not only that, but they find another body on the floor, which they believe to be Frank's. The strangest thing is that his bones and skin are separated, as if something had come out of his body. Shortly after, Lucas returns home, but the teacher prevents him from entering, so he doesn't see what happened to his father. She then takes him to the hospital, and after Lucas is admitted, the doctor alerts Paul and Julia about his condition. In addition to being dehydrated and malnourished, the boy has also suffered trauma from the situation he was living in at home. The doctor recommends that Lucas remain hospitalized and prohibits any kind of questioning until he recovers. However, it is still necessary to decide who he will stay with, and without thinking twice, Julia commits to taking care of the boy. Paul, however, does not think this is a good idea and warns Julia that staying with him will not make her forget the past. Both brothers also suffered abuse from their father, which led Julia to leave home. Even so, she is determined to take care of her student for as long as it takes, and will take him home as soon as he is discharged. Meanwhile, Lucas is in his room, and as he falls asleep, he begins to dream about his father and younger brother. When Frank and Aiden returned from the mine, the boy's father began to feel ill and told his sons to stay away from him at all costs. To ensure their safety, Frank locked the attic door and isolated himself inside. However, Aiden was also affected and began to feel ill, which led Frank to take his son into the attic, and since then, the two have remained trapped, being cared for by Lucas. Another day passes and Paul, alongside Julia, takes Lucas's belongings found in the house and brings them to Warren. Because of his Native American heritage, the sheriff asks him if he can decipher the meaning of the drawings made by the boy. Looking at the images, he picks up a book on indigenous myths, which tells of a monster known as the Wendigo. According to local legend, a hungry hunter resorted to cannibalism and began hunting humans to devour them, but was never able to satisfy his hunger. When he perished, his evil spirit began to roam the region in search of human hosts to feed on. The only way to defeat him is to strike his still beating heart before he can transfer his soul to another victim. Upon hearing this story, Sheriff Paul believes it is nothing more than a myth, but Warren assures him that evil spirits have been wandering the earth for many years. The sheriff, however, believes it was pointless to go there and heads back when he receives another call from the police station. This time, they have found the missing boy and send the sheriff to the indicated location. Upon arriving there, the sheriff can barely hide his shock when he sees Clint's body, which has been devoured. He tries to find a logical answer as to who could have done this to the boy, but he can't find any explanation. Julia suspects that the myth about the Wendigo may be true, which only makes her more worried about Lucas. For this reason, she and her brother return to the hospital and agree to adopt him. After dropping Julia and Lucas off at their house, Paul returns to the police station and asks his partner, Officer Dan, to keep an eye on them. Inside the house, the teacher talks to Lucas and tells him what happened to Frank. However, the boy says that his father is not lifeless, he has just taken on a new form, and soon he will come to get him to take care of him and his brother. Julia doesn't understand what Lucas means, but seconds later, they both hear a loud roar coming from outside the house. The teacher then rushes to take the boy to Paul's office and tries to grab one of his guns, but they are all locked to the walls. Meanwhile, Dan hears the noise and goes to search the outside of the house, when he sees a box moving inside the pantry. As he approaches, he finds Aiden inside the box and alerts Paul via the communicator, but immediately afterwards, he is attacked by the Wendigo, who strikes the police officer with his claws. The sheriff hears his friend's cries of pain and rushes to help him. Unfortunately, it is too late, and he finds Dan's body lying in front of the pantry. Paul then puts on his bulletproof vest and pulls out his revolver. Inside the house, Julia watches her brother approach the scene, and in a moment of distraction, Lucas seizes the chance and runs away. At the same time, the sheriff approaches the pantry and finds Aiden, but is also attacked by the Wendigo, who throws him away. The sheriff recovers from the blow, but is attacked again by the creature, which manages to hit his arm with its horns. Paul manages to get rid of the Wendigo by hitting it in the head with a tool, but the sheriff is seriously injured and begins to lose blood. Minutes later, Julia leaves the house and goes to find her brother, only to find him unconscious and with an injured arm. She then improvises a bandage and says she will go after Lucas, but the sheriff insists on going with her, as the creature is more dangerous than they imagined. Julia agrees, believing that the monster must have returned to the mine, taking Lucas and Aiden with him. She then speeds the car to the site, but on the way, Paul becomes unconscious due to his injuries. In order not to risk her brother's life, Julia contacts the police station and calls an ambulance to rescue him. Soon after, she leaves alone for the mine, taking a flashlight and Paul's weapons with her. Upon entering the site, Julia calls out for Lucas, but there is no sign of the boy or the Wendigo anywhere. Even so, the teacher continues on until she finds several pieces of flesh scattered on the ground. Then she finally finds Lucas and Aiden, but the boy asks Julia to run away as soon as possible, because his father is nearby. The teacher then shines her flashlight around the place, when she sees the body of a bear being devoured by a huge monster. Noticing Julia's presence, the Wendigo reveals itself, showing its monstrous appearance, with its face covered by Frank's skin. With no time to lose, the teacher points her gun at the creature and starts shooting, but the shots cause no damage, and the monster knocks her to the ground with an attack. Julia rushes to retrieve her gun, and as soon as she gets up, she pulls the trigger again, but the monster disappears. Suddenly, the Wendigo appears behind her, removes Frank's face, and lunges toward her. But Julia manages to turn around in time and shoots the creature once more. The Wendigo continues to resist and throws Julia's gun away, but she finds a flare on the ground and lights it. The bright light causes the creature to retreat, and just as Warren warned her, she grabs a sharp iron pipe and tries to strike the monster's heart. However, the Wendigo manages to dodge, and the pipe gets stuck in its throat. The monster manages to pull it out and advances toward Julia, who is now unarmed and has nowhere to run. This seems to be the end, but in a surprise attack, Lucas grabs his pocketknife and stabs the Wendigo in the back, who falls to the ground, already without strength. However, Julia knows that this is not the end yet, and grabbing the pocketknife, she turns the monster on its back and uses the blade to open its body. She then manages to find the Wendigo's heart and, with her hands, Julia rips it out of its body. Everything indicates that the monster is gone forever, but unfortunately, Aiden has also been taken over by the dark spirit and begins to scream as he begins his transformation process. Unfortunately, Julia knows what needs to be done, and pulls out her pocketknife to put an end to Aiden's suffering. However, Lucas stops her, saying that his brother is just sick, and he can cure him somehow. Julia knows this won't be possible, though, and asks Lucas to keep his face turned away the whole time. Finally, she hugs the boy, apologizes for what she has to do, and then Lucas covers his ears so he won't hear his little brother's screams of pain. Days after this tragedy, Paul and Julia take Lucas on a trip to the seaside. The sheriff is still worried about the boy because, after all, he fears that Lucas will suffer the same fate as his father and also be possessed by the Wendigo. However, Julia promises that she will not let that happen and calls the boy back home. Paul accompanies them, but suddenly he starts coughing violently, and a dark liquid comes out of his mouth, just as it did with Frank and Aiden. Everything indicates that Paul will be the next to be possessed by the Wendigo, and soon, Julia will have to face the dark spirit once again. Subscribe for more recap videos.